On Thursday, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis suspended Hillsborough County State Attorney Andrew Warren for pledging not to enforce the state's restrictions on abortion and transgender surgery. Here's what DeSantis said.
We don't elect people in one part of the state to have veto power over what the entire state decides on these important issues. The Constitution of Florida has vested the veto power in the governor, not in individual state attorneys. And so when you flagrantly violate your oath of office, when you make yourself above the law, you have violated your duty, you have neglected your duty, and you are displaying a lack of competence to be able to perform those duties. And so today we are suspending State Attorney Andrew Warren effective immediately.
Warren, a Democrat, signed letters stating he would not enforce, quote, prohibitions on sex change operations for minors, end quote, or, quote, any laws related to protecting the right to life, end quote. The suspension overrides some 300,000 plus Hillsborough County residents who cast their ballot for Warren in 2020. He won with 53.4% of the vote.
Katie, that's an interesting point. Like, that is absolutely true. He was duly elected, but so is the legislature that passed the legislation. And so if we want to make this argument that DeSantis, some of the people on the left have made this argument that he's acting in a sort of dictatorial way, sure. He is, when he said that Warren has his duty is to enforce, quote, enforce the law. That's true. That's why people elect people in positions like Warren's, is to enforce the law that they elect the legislature to pass. And there is a procedure to override, for the legislature to override DeSantis's decision. And so far, none of this seems to be violating any sort of democratic norms that I can think of. It's Warren's right to make that call, and then it's DeSantis's right to step in and say, hey, this is the law that was passed by people who were elected by the voters, enforce it or you're out.
Right. I mean, there is some, I think, gray area here because, of course, attorneys are allowed to, or prosecutors are allowed to use their discretion.
Yes.
And we've seen this in Florida, actually, of all places, not surprisingly, where Rick Scott tried to remove certain prosecutors for saying that they would not pursue the death penalty. And of course, you know, I think you and I sit on different sides of this issue.
Of the death penalty?
Oh, no.
I was going to say, because I'm probably on your side of the death penalty.
Of abortion.
Yes.
But I do think, so I'm obviously inclined, full disclosure, to look for how it's not okay for DeSantis to do this, and it is okay for the prosecutor to do this. But I do think that it is legal gray area. I think that depending on which side of the issue you're on, you can make the argument for either one.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's such an important thing to say, because on the conservative side, you know, there's a lot of reflexive love and praise for DeSantis.
Sure.
And personally, I think there's a lot of good reasons for that. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be skeptical when he there are questions about whether he's overstepping his authority. Because when you get, you know, so much praise, it's much, much easier to push the limit and keep. And so that's why, if anything, you know, when you praise someone, you should be on high alert, especially as a journalist, for anything wrong. I don't totally see it here, but like you said, there are obviously arguments, and Warren himself made one of those arguments. Go ahead, Katie.
Right, yeah, I think you could argue overreach on either side, right? So, like, obviously DeSantis is kind of saying that Warren is engaging in overreach. And you could also argue that DeSantis is engaging in overreach because it's not up to him, it's up to the prosecutor to determine what things he or she will actually prosecute.
So Warren came out, immediately condemned the suspension yesterday. He accused Governor DeSantis of acting unconstitutionally, just as we were discussing. Let's take a look at that clip.
What I know, if you want to talk about the abortion ban, when I became state attorney, I put my hand on the Bible and I swore to uphold the U.S. and the Florida Constitution. And under the Florida Constitution, the 15-week abortion ban is unconstitutional. And it's not just me saying that, it is a court of law that has said that. The governor's bill has already been thrown out. Now, it's subject to other appeal, but while the governor is hoping that the Supreme Court ignores the law in Florida, I'm the one upholding the law. I'm the one protecting people's rights. I'm the only one at this moment who's actually making sure that we are following the law in Hillsborough County.
Well, and to Katie's point, this is where you get into, like, as laws are going through our court system, whether or not something is constitutional becomes absolutely a gray area, because circuit courts say one thing, then it loses on appeal,
Right.
and then we get into a different direction, and that's essentially what's happening
Yeah.
here. If those court rulings hadn't gone his way, I think he would have a much weaker case to stand on, and that may happen eventually.
Sure, right.
Which is why I feel like it's actually, if there's a silver lining to all of this, or this controversy, it's that Florida has a democratic system where if the legislature is upset with DeSantis' move, they can overrule it.
Yeah, I mean, it's always easier said than done.
Right.
So I think that, having watched that Warren clip, I'm going to double down even more than because there's two issues. One issue is whether or not DeSantis has the right to do it, and the other issue is what the law is. And it does seem like Warren is actually the one who's following the law at this point. DeSantis is getting excited about how the next court is going to decide on it.
Katie doubles down on straws, doubles down on
my
Warren.
take, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, here's a quote. This is in the Wall Street Journal. It's from Tampa Mayor Jane Castor that I thought was really interesting. Jane Castor said, "Removing a duly elected official should be based on egregious actions,
right.
not political statements." Now, what's interesting to me about that quote is it comes down to how we define egregious
Sure.
actions. And I think there's a pretty serious argument to be made that not following a law passed by democratically elected legislators is egregious, whatever the politics of it are. If it's a death penalty law, if it's a welfare law, whatever it is, you can make a pretty clear argument, I think, that declining to enforce a law passed by people elected by the people of Florida from the position of a prosecutor is egregious. But to your point, Katie, it just depends on how you're defining that.
Yeah, although he is following the law as of now. So I think that it was the statement that DeSantis doesn't like, as opposed to what he's doing, which does actually, kind of relating back to the Ken Klippenstein thing, it's almost like pre-crime.
How do you mean?
Well, he's saying that he won't prosecute certain things, and the things that he's saying he won't prosecute are things that are currently still legal.
Legally,
in Florida.
like limbo.
Well, yeah, but they haven't been decided. They haven't been overturned yet, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And again, it's like the law itself was passed, and we have this like court system that I actually genuinely think works fairly well, a lot better than it does in other countries. And in between point A and point B, it's a gray area where it's
Right.
like, what on earth? But then again, like, I guess I'm left thinking, if the legislature's upset with this, if the people of Florida are upset with this, it would create an incentive for the legislators to act.
Yeah.
And say to Governor DeSantis, you've overstepped your bounds.
Yeah.
So
hopefully they do.
Yeah, and we'll
Until
see.
then, maybe Hillsborough can secede. I would do that if I were there.
Also easier said than done.
Yeah, of course. Yes, you're right. Maybe we'll have to go with your step first. Yeah.
It's funny. Well, we'll see what happens in the legal cases going forward. We'll see what happens in the Florida legislature going forward, and we'll continue to stay on top of the story. Of course, we will have more rising for you right after this.